Have you ever really, truly stopped to think about how we learn to talk? I mean, it's something almost every single one of us does, but it's one of the most ridiculously complex things our brains will ever do. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this everyday miracle, from how we build our very first language to how we tackle the challenge of learning a second one.
Right, so here's the big mystery. How does a tiny baby, with 0 lessons, no textbooks, nothing, go from making little gurgling sounds to speaking in grammatically correct sentences in just a handful of years? What's amazing is that this process is pretty much the same for kids all over the world, which tells us our brains are following some kind of universal blueprint for language.
And the speed of it all is just mind-blowing. At around 6 to 9 months old, babies kick off what's called canonical babbling. You know, those classic ba-ba-ba sounds. By their first birthday, a lot of them are already saying their first real words. Just 1 year after that, they're piecing together 2-word sentences, and then boom, by age 3, they're hitting you with complex questions. This incredibly fast, predictable timeline is what makes it all feel like a miracle.
So, how on earth does this happen? Let's get into the nuts and bolts of learning our first language, or what linguists call our L1. It turns out our brains come kind of pre-wired for the job, but the world around us immediately starts to shape that raw potential.
This brings us to a really cool process called perceptual narrowing. See, babies are born as universal listeners. They can actually hear the differences between sounds in all human languages. So a baby in an English-speaking home can tell the difference between 2 Hindi sounds that, honestly, you or I probably couldn't. But around 10 to 12 months, their brain starts to specialize. It's like it turns up the volume on the sounds of its own language and starts to tune out the rest.
And the specific language a kid hears totally shapes what they learn first. Take English. It's a stress-timed language, which just means that important words, especially nouns, get more emphasis. This leads to a noun bias, where a toddler's first words are almost always things like ball or dog. But contrast that with Japanese. It has a different rhythm and often puts verbs at the very end of sentences, making them stand out. So what happens? Japanese kids often start saying verbs way earlier than English-speaking kids.
Then, around age 2, kids hit this awesome phase called telegraphic speech. These little phrases like mommy juice might sound simple, but they are pure creativity. The child isn't just a parrot. They're not just imitating. I mean, they've probably never heard an adult say, more outside. They are actively smashing words together to create totally new meanings, which proves they're already getting the hang of basic grammar.
And that creativity brings us right to the heart of one of the biggest showdowns in linguistics. Are we born with a blueprint for language already in our heads? Or are our minds just a blank slate, waiting to be filled up by what we hear?
So, in one corner, you've got the innatist view, with Noam Chomsky as its champion. He argued that we're all born with a universal grammar, like a built-in operating system for language that helps us figure out the rules of whatever language we hear. And in the other corner, you have the behaviorist view, from B.F. Skinner. He claimed language is nothing special. It's just a habit we learn through imitation, practice, and getting a pat on the back when we get it right.
Okay, to make this less theoretical, let's do a famous experiment, right here, right now. Take a look at this. This little creature is a wug. There, I've just taught you a brand new word for a thing you've never seen before.
Okay, now there are 2 of them, so there are 2... Go on, say it out loud. I bet you know exactly what to call them, even though you've never ever heard the word wug in your life before today.
You said wugs, didn't you? Of course you did. This simple test from back in 1958 is powerful stuff. It's a huge piece of evidence that we do more than just imitate. Little kids do this instinctively. It shows they have an internal rule book for grammar that lets them apply rules, like adding an S to make a plural, to words they've never even heard. So score 1 for the innatist team.
Here's another fascinating clue, a pattern called U-shaped learning. A little kid might start out saying went perfectly, just because they memorized it. But then, as their amazing little brain figures out the rule for past tense is to add ed, they'll start making mistakes, like saying good. Now, this is not a step backward. That mistake is actually the sign of a genius at work, applying a new rule everywhere. And then eventually, they relearn that went is just one of those weird exceptions. Okay, so that's the almost magical journey of our first language. Now let's switch gears and talk about the much more conscious adventure of learning a second language, or an L2. And trust me, the game completely changes here.
I think this quote from the linguist David Wilkins just nails the challenge. Basically, you can know all the grammar rules in the world, but if you don't have the words, the vocabulary, you can't actually say anything. Building up that word bank is the first massive hurdle for every second language learner.
But becoming fluent is about so much more than just words and rules. The real goal is what experts call communicative competence. Sure, you need the grammar and vocab, but you also need to know how to use language in different social settings. You don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your best friend. You need to know how to build a real conversation, and you definitely need strategies for what to do when your brain freezes and you can't find the word you're looking for.
So why does it feel so much harder to learn a language when you're older? Well, that brings us to the famous and, yeah, pretty debated critical period hypothesis. The basic idea is that a kid's brain is just more flexible, more like plastic. The theory goes that there's this biological window, which probably closes around puberty, where you can soak up a language and sound like a native. After that, our brains get a bit more set in their ways, making it much harder to get to that same level.
But it's not all about age, not by a long shot. When it comes to learning a second language, success is a deeply personal thing. So let's look at the key individual factors that can really make or break a learner's journey. I love this image because, man, doesn't it just nail that feeling, that anxiety about getting every single rule perfect? But the truth is, success is a much more complex recipe, with a ton of ingredients that go way beyond grammar.
So what are these key ingredients? Well, there's age, which we've talked about. There's aptitude. Some people just have a natural knack for it. Personality is a huge one. Are you a risk taker who's willing to talk and make mistakes? Your learning environment is also critical. But maybe the most powerful ingredient of all, the one that really fuels everything else, is your motivation, your why.
And speaking of age, here's something that might surprise you. Who do you think learns faster in the beginning? It's actually adults. We can use our grown-up, problem-solving brains to find shortcuts and make really quick progress at the start. But over the long haul, kids who start earlier usually end up reaching a higher level of fluency in the end, especially when it comes to things like having a perfect accent.
And that super important ingredient, motivation, it's not just one simple thing. It actually comes in 3 phases. First, you've got choice motivation. That's the spark, the, hey, I'm going to learn Spanish for my vacation moment. Then comes the hard part, executive motivation. That's the grit that keeps you studying when you'd rather be doing anything else. And finally, there's motivational retrospection. That's when you look back and decide, was that worth it? And your answer to that question will decide if you ever try it again. So we've looked at the automatic miracle of learning our first language and the very conscious quest for a second. What does it all really mean? Well, when you boil it all down, it comes back to your own personal journey.
In the end, learning to talk isn't just one thing. It's this beautiful, complicated, and deeply human process. It's a complex dance between the blueprint we're born with, the world we grow up in, and the unique personality and drive that each one of us brings to the table. Every single conversation you have, every mistake you make, every new word you learn, it's all just another step in this incredible human adventure. A journey that really never ends. So the only question left is, what part of your language journey are you going to explore next?